Okay guys, so today we are going to talk about some of the problems in the review. We're going to practice finding domain and range. We're going to practice it by creating a box, which helps a lot of students really visualize domain and range. So we're going to start with problem number 1. We're going to take a marker, and all we're going to do is create a box around this shape, this line segment that we have. Now notice how with my marker, I highlighted the lines. I didn't highlight squares. I didn't highlight in between lines. I specifically highlighted lines. So in this problem, we're looking at which inequality best represents the range. Range, if you remember from what I told you, x and y went to the doctor. So x is domain and our y is our range. So when we're looking at range, we're specifically looking at y values. And to find range in this problem, we have to look at the y-axis. So y-axis goes up and down. We're going to look at where does our box start. And looking at this, our box starts at -1. So I'm going to write -1 underneath. And it ends at, I think that's 5. So I'm going to write a 5 on the top. And now that I know where it starts and where it stops, all I'm going to do is I'm going to write these numbers down. I always have to write the smallest one first and then the biggest one. So -1 and 5. And because I'm looking at range, I'm looking at the y value. Remember, y is range. So I'm going to write a y in between these. I'm always going to have less than signs, so I'm going to put less than in between the numbers and the y. The question is, am I going to have lines underneath the less than's? Well, when I look at -1, am I using -1? Well, there's an open circle here. That means I'm not using a -1, so I'm not going to put a line underneath it. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. When I look at -1, which is down here, I have an open circle, which means I'm not using -1, which means a line doesn't go here. When I'm looking at 5, which is up here, I have to look at the edges of my box. I have an open circle, y is 5, and that means I'm not using the 5, so I'm not going to put a line underneath. And looking at my answer choices, my answer has to be H. Problem number 2. Mr. Maxwell asked the students to identify the domain represented by the function graph below. Which of the following student responses is correct? So I'm looking at domain, and remember x and y went to the doctor. X is the domain, so I'm going to write an x on top of domain. And I'm going to go ahead and create a box. Notice the box has to contain everything in our segment that we have. So this box contains our entire curve. Okay, so domain, I'm looking at the x. That means I'm looking at the x-axis, which is right here. And I'm looking at where does this box start and where does it end on the x-axis. Remember, x is this one. So I see that my box starts at -5 and it ends at 6. So I'm going to write a 6 next to it. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to write these numbers below. I'm looking at domain, which means I'm looking at the x value, so I'm going to write an x in the middle. I'm always going to have less than sign, so I'm going to put less than on both sides. And now the question is, am I using the -5? Well, when x is -5, looking throughout this whole edge, I have a closed circle, which means I am using -5, which means I'm going to put a line underneath this. Am I using 6? Well, looking at 6, looking across that entire edge of that box, I have an open circle, which means I am not using 6, which means I do not put a line underneath that less than sign. So here's my domain, and looking at my answers, the answer should be F. Number 3. Which of the following best represents the range of the function shown below? Okay, so we're looking at range. Remember, x and y went to the doctor. Which means that my y is my range, so I'm going to write a y underneath here. Okay, so this one is different because my graph doesn't start and stop somewhere. In this one's different also because we have arrows. Anytime you see arrows, you should know that your box is not going to start and finish somewhere. The box is a little different. So I'm going to start by first creating my box, which I'm going to try. So if I start here and I start shading, can I really stop anywhere? No, because remember what we talked about in class? These lines are going to continue on forever and ever. So whenever you're taking your test, what I would recommend is anytime you see arrows, just exaggerate those arrows. Just like that. Or I'm just going to exaggerate it even more. There. Run out of the page. They're going to continue on to infinity. So if I start creating my box, if I start shading this way, again, I cannot really stop anywhere because my line is going to continue on forever and ever. So let's look at this. I'm looking at range, which means I'm looking at the y-axis. This is my y-axis. So I'm looking at where does my box start, and I see from here it starts at -4. But can it stop anywhere? Nope, because as I can see from both of these lines, they're going to keep going up forever and ever. So it doesn't stop anywhere. I'm going to continue using that y-axis to make these lines forever and ever. So this is going to go to positive infinity. So my range I have is from -4 to positive infinity. I'll write a y in the middle because I'm looking at range. And I'm going to put less than signs. Am I using the -4? Yes, because I do not have an open circle there. And I am using infinity. Okay, but our answer choices are a bit different. We actually have to read them. The range is all real numbers. Looking at this range, am I using all the numbers? No. I'm not using -5, -9, -10. So I'm not using real numbers, that's not it. The range is all real numbers greater than or equal to 4. So here's 4. Am I only using numbers that are bigger than 4? Well, no. What about 0 and -2 and -4? So that's not it. The range is all real numbers greater than or equal to 0. So I'm looking for range, I'm looking at the y-axis, and here's 0. Am I only using 0 and everything above it? No. What about -2, -3, -4? The range is all real numbers greater than or equal to -4. So here's -4. And am I using everything above -4 to create these lines? Yes. And am I using anything below -4? No, because I do not have lines underneath it. So the range is all real numbers greater than or equal to -4. Okay, what would the domain be? Well, notice that domain is the x. I'm looking at the x-axis, and I'm going sideways. Looking at this box that I try to create, my box is going to go from -infinity all the way to +infinity. It's never going to stop going on the left, and it's never going to stop going in on the right direction. So really, to create this graph, to create these lines, I had to use all the x values, every single x value. So rather than write from -infinity to +infinity, I'm just going to say all real numbers. Because I'm using every single x value. Okay, so that is it for the review so far. This is part 1. I will be posting part 2 soon. Make sure you watch it and make sure that you practice creating boxes and finding domain and range.